Welcome to the Take Note podcast. This is Ananda, and I'm with Keli, as well as our two wonderful guests who we're just having the pleasure to meet, Daniel and Eduardo. Eduardo is on my, I guess, in the screen on my right. No, right. Anyway, I always get really confused with these mirror images.
Above me.
And then Daniel's in the box below. And they are from the Know Thyself podcast. And yeah, super excited. Keli, kind of let us know how they
we have a mutual friend who hopefully is watching now, called Gala del Sol. And myself and Ananda were introduced to Gala last year because we're part of a creative collective group of yogis and spiritual enthusiasts and seekers. So Gala's been quite a fundamental person in my life over the past few months, really sharing a lot of wisdom regarding like mysticism and different aspects of philosophies from both ancient Eastern and Western traditions. And she's an avid listener of both of you, so she recommended that we reach out. And I'm a big fan. I've been listening to a few of your podcasts over the past few weeks, and I just thought it would be really nice to take an opportunity to come together and churn some knowledge and wisdom and see what comes out. So I hope this is actually the first of a few conversation we could possibly have together. But as we haven't met, I was just wondering if whoever would like to go first, if maybe you could introduce yourselves, we could introduce ourselves a little, and then we can jump into a discussion.
Go right ahead, Daniel. Let's.
You want me to get it started?
Go.
Absolutely. Well, my name's Daniel. My partner in crime up there is Eduardo, and we've been doing the Know Thy podcast. Actually, we're just approaching a year, so wow. I'll do our 52nd episode next month or next week. So that's been really exciting, and it happens so fast, which we always talk about. And we always have that conversation, but it's just so, it's really great when you are going with the flow and you're actually going with the stream. And we always talk about that on the podcast. And this whole project has kind of felt like that throughout this whole thing. It felt so natural and it felt so right. And we got it started just, we should just have these conversations. And now I think it's like the thing we both look forward to most during the week is just to get together and talk about the same kind of subjects that you guys are presenting, because it's just so applicable to our time. I think it's so important for all of our kind of development to kind of speak about this spiritual information and share these principles amongst each other. So it's the ultimate honor to be on this podcast with you two gentlemen today and to meet you guys. And we really are looking forward to having many conversations in the future.
Yeah.
Awesome. And just to clarify, so it's quite early for you guys. You're in Arizona now, right? So it's like 6 a.m. in the morning, and you've just arrived at school. You're a school teacher as well. Is that correct?
Yes. I am a school teacher as well. So I teach history and philosophy. That's what I was sneaking in today. And I, of course, got caught in a little bit of traffic. So thank you for being patient with me, guys. And thank you for adjusting to our time, because Eduardo and we do kind of have a funky schedule right now. So I'm glad we were able to make this work.
Yeah, we were navigating over like 3 different time zones. Yeah. It's been mad. I think I've logged on to this live stream about 3 times today already. Like, oh no, I'm an hour behind. And... anyway,
it was so funny even in our conversation, because we were trying to figure out what time zone we were in, and it's so difficult to do that through texting sometimes. So,
and especially because Arizona, that you guys don't have the daylight savings, so then you guys switch halfway through the year.
Yeah, we don't play by anybody's rules, not even our own out here. Yeah,
it's the wild desert.
It's the Wild West, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. And I'm happy to hear too that this Know Thyself podcast was kind of it's cool seeing the fruit, so to speak, of the lockdown for so many people. Like when that external kind of cauldron, captured the world and the things that people did with that, when that container kind of everyone got in that container and what came out of that for people. So this is cool to bear witness to that.
Oh, thanks, man. Right back at you guys. I'm sure it was the same for you, right? I mean,
A lot of different things were coming out. Yeah. It's been
there was no reason why we couldn't share this, information, have these conversations with individuals like yourself, and actually to really be overwhelmed by all the other individuals who are on the same path was a real awakening for both Daniel and I, because we've always had these conversations since we were very young. And I think when we started talking about, that this kind of philosophy or various philosophies, we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, but we always just, exchanged information with one another, and it was just a matter of plugging in and then sharing it with everyone else. So it's been a very, I don't know, it's a blessing for sure, because again, we would have these conversations regardless. So it's nice that we have someone who cares to listen and exchange information like this with.
Yeah, totally. It's like we're already doing it. Might as well just record it and send it.
Exactly.
right.
I had a similar realization yesterday. I was thinking about how actually everyone is special. Everyone has something to share. It's just some people do choose to share and some people don't. And like, my mother's just made a new friend. She started an art group, and this woman in the art group, she's a very shy person. And it turns out she's an incredible singer. She has like a professional voice, and she's so shy. She's never shared it with anyone. And the first person she's ever shared her singing with is my mother. So I listened to this recording and I was just thinking, man, everyone is special. It's just like some people, they choose to share and some people they don't. But rather than like sharing about ourselves, I really want to delve into a conversation about knowledge and wisdom and how that affects ourselves. And maybe just before we jump into a discussion, to make it clear, I'm not so sure if you follow like a specific spiritual path or what your kind of day-to-day spiritual life is like. For myself and Ananda, we follow like Bhakti yoga, Krishna consciousness. And both Ananda and myself spent a few years in ashrams, traveling and studying these kind of ancient wisdom tradition of India, based on Bhakti, which means devotion. And on a day-to-day routine, we practice like mantra meditation, forms of yoga, service, and study of ancient Sanskrit texts, which can both be very esoteric and also very easy to penetrate and assimilate.
Well said.
Yeah, so on a day-to-day basis, we have our spiritual schedule, which involves meditation, yoga, service, and study. But yeah, maybe before we delve into a discussion, I'd love to know if what your day-to-day life is like, because obviously you're teaching in school and you're doing podcasts and you're doing various things. But is there like a center? Is there a gravitational force, or are you kind of happy more to subscribe to a kind of general worldview of spirituality? I'd love to hear a little bit about that before we discuss something specific.
Daniel, I'll let you answer that first.
Yeah. And it's a fantastic question, because sometimes it's great when you get asked those questions, because then you actually do have to define it. You're like, oh, actually, what do we actually kind of follow out? And I think what Eduardo and I are really fascinated is universal spiritual principles. So we're really attracted to finding these pillars of spirituality and really connecting with this foundation. And then through those principles and foundation, we're able to really kind of immerse ourselves into all these different kind of spiritual practices, whether it's Eastern or Western philosophy. So I think what really attracts us and what's been what we've really kind of focused on that podcast is finding those universal principles that kind of transcend all these beautiful esoteric religious organizations. And what we've really found is when we've kind of really studied the principles, when we're now approached by maybe a spiritual practice that we're, not so familiar with, we're able to kind of digest that information, and we're able to almost use that common language that we're kind of formed from alchemy. And that's kind of where I guess our base study would be. But it's so beautiful. Once you learn the principles of one esoteric organization, you're really able to apply those universally. And I think that's what we're always looking. We're always looking for those universal principles that kind of, really sees the blossoming of all these beautiful spiritual practices. So whether it's Eastern or Western, we're really just kind of tied into the evolution of consciousness, and how we can kind of help speed up our own personal evolutions of consciousness, so the collective of consciousness can, really blossom into what we know it can be.
That's
right.
Beautiful.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Yeah, I mean, I think with Daniel, to add to that, as far as like a daily routine, for me at least, it's always been about understanding that in the physical that we are in always right now, and especially in the Western world that we find ourselves in, it's a very easy thing to do when it comes to falling into this sort of rat race, as we always talk about. So my daily routine in that regards to Daniel's answer about, diving into all these principles and making them applicable is to just remind myself every day that my physical body here is limited. There's not an infinite time that I'll be here for, and to make sure I don't waste the day away by just getting caught up in the things that don't transcend into another realm after this lifetime. And so, it's a daily meditation, because you have to really sort of take yourself out of the whole routine of all the lives that you're probably involved in, whether it's your spouse or whether it's your family. And so, I think for me, anything that we do, whether it's the podcast or our careers, has to have you have to have like a clear sense of like why you're doing what you're doing before you even do it. And it's something I do daily, because I will struggle with it. I will get caught up in everything. And before you know it, I'm like, my whole sympathetic system is just through the roof, because I'm just overwhelmed by all this information, or by, status or anything else that may, be expected of me. And so, with the podcast, Daniel and I have always said since the beginning, it's like, look, we're here to just have these principles to share with everyone else, and to also better ourselves as people on the daily. So,
I just want to say, when you both were speaking, a few things. One is that as you guys are kind of diving into your explanations and kind of the mindset with which you both are approaching life, and with which you both are approaching the podcast that you run, and just in general, I'm feeling so many seeds planted in my heart of like, oh man, I want to talk more about that. Oh man, I want to talk more about that. Like, just these seeds of a relationship that I'm actually feeling very excited about. Secondly, Daniel, you reminded me of this word. There's a Sanskrit word, saragrahi. Saragrahi means to grab the essence. And I appreciated that so much, because you're speaking that there are these universal principles, and when we can simultaneously grab the essence of these universal principles from these wisdom traditions around the world, right, and then be able to assimilate those, right, because I think there's a line, and this could be a whole nother conversation also, but the line of like kind of cherry picking universal principles, or like kind of just collecting ideas or reading books just so I read the book, rather than, like you also mentioned, allowing my consciousness to upgrade. Like, how am I actually applying and assimilating, embodying these universal principles, these essences of wisdom tradition? And Eduardo, I love this point that you brought up too, about knowing what is my intention for embarking on this, that having that goal in mind, having that that the clarity of our intention, and the clearer our intention, the more potency our actions will actually carry with them. So I appreciate, both of those things so much. Like I said, so many seeds are being planted in the heart of like, I just want to unfold all of that.
Yes. I feel those seeds as well, for sure. And I wanted to share this example that I often think about of the iceberg. So they say we see the iceberg on top of the waters, as you know, but the bulk of the iceberg is underneath the water. And what we wanted to kind of discuss today was like going behind the veil, seeking the essence in both Eastern and Western traditions. And this example of the iceberg comes to mind as well, because it's very easy to see life in an external and perhaps superficial way. And it actually takes humility, confidence, enthusiasm, spiritual maturity to seek the essence, to think like, is there something more than what meets the eye? I've had a really interesting journey myself, because before I kind of dedicated myself to one specific path, I was a musician, and I was delving into so many things: sacred geometry, alchemy, Kabbalah, Kabbalion, all sorts of things. And I could see truth within them all. But the one thing I was lacking was a paradigm in which I could see everything, see the essence of these things. And when I started practicing this very specific type of yoga, Bhakti yoga, it gave me like a paradigm in which I could see all of these traditions. So I was very committed to specific knowledge, and coming to contact with people like Gala and people like yourselves, I'm again beginning to become intrigued by these various different paths. And now I have a paradigm into which I can put them all, and they all make sense, So there's this simultaneous kind of focal point, but there's also an open mind to all things, and being able to see all things in relationship with one another. What I really wanted to do to start the conversation, because it's Earth Day today. I don't know if you know. So there's many ways we could approach this, but I really wanted to perhaps instigate a conversation around like two things, like dependence and connection. I was just thinking how every life form is dependent upon another life form, in an emotional way, in a biological way, or a spiritual way. And every life form has an impetus for connection, right? We're always looking to connect, whether again physically or subtly or spiritually, philosophically, whatever it is. So as it's Earth Day, I wanted to maybe touch upon these two topics, like dependence, connection, and how in our modern times we're perhaps straying away from connection with the earth, connection from with our souls, connection with one another. And yeah, maybe you guys could share some thoughts on the importance of connection and realizing our dependence on not only Mother Earth, but on one another as human beings and as extended entities in the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the celestial kingdom, and so on. So I'm not sure if that was something you could maybe trail off with.
Oh yeah. No, I think that's a fantastic. Do you want to start, Eddie?
Oh yeah, go. Well, all I was going to say is those are two great topics. So if we want to go from there, Daniel, feel free to come in whenever you'd like. But I just wanted to say, like, those two topics, as far as dependence goes and that connection. I mean, I think connection from my perspective, and in regards to everything that we'll go from here on out talking about, is for me a very important step in the evolution of just like trust, especially if you're going to be connected to something that's not seen by the five senses. And I think that back to how we started this podcast and going into these philosophies. And again, I don't want to speak just for Daniel, but for me, I understood that emotionally, each of us have a deeper, kind of the iceberg effect that you were talking about, have a deeper story that drives us as humans on the daily. And if we don't know what that story is and we don't know how to connect to that, our emotions are sort of vulnerable to other individuals taking advantage of us, or maybe not creating a bridge or a connection between people that you could be learning from, or at least they could be aiding you and you could be aiding them in this life. And I think that segregation where we are right now in this time in history is more common than not. But if people were to take the step to find out what someone's actually going through, whether it's in an emotional level or an intellectual level, once we bind that, once we have that connection, living a daily life becomes a little more, I should say, you feel a little more inspired, to continue on. And I feel like that's where a lot of individuals right now, that I know personally, I can't speak for, your community, but they want to think they're alone in it. And I'm here to just sort of like take those barriers down and say, hey, this is something I've felt as well. How can we go ahead and connect on something so we have each other's back, or have each other's support in such a vulnerable state that you find yourself in and I find myself in. And then we both together can be vulnerable together, but we're together. Therefore, you're not alone. And I think that's very important. And so, and then as far as the dependence to earth, I think that a lot of people are actually like finding out that they need to not just have a connection with a human experience, but also a universal experience. Because I mean, with the air that we all breathe, and then, the light that we all share from either the sun or, from a realm that we can't see, I think that having that sort of understanding of that dependence is key. But I'll stop there and let Daniel kind of continue on from.
I loved where you were going with that, because I completely agree, and I think you brought up a really good point with the dependency and that connection. And one thing that we've been really kind of looking at with this kind of transition astrologically from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius is one thing that's very much presenting itself is the age of Aquarius is really about networks and the networks we make. And one thing that we've kind of, as this idea of networks is kind of developing, and I think as consciously we're kind of getting more insight on what that means, it's not just the network of all humans, but it's the network of all living consciousness within our universe, from the smallest form of consciousness to the most advanced. And I think making that connection, and I think with that kind of pulls in the idea of that connection with Earth, because when we really start seeing the world through these spiritual principles, you really do have this idea that everything's alive. And it's so funny because this is stuff we knew as children. And then we kind of go through this like indoctrination. We go through this whole, the 5 sense illusion of reality that we kind of get tied to. And we kind of lose that connection. And I really feel like coming back around and making those strong networks to, and seeing consciousness in everything. And when you can really start to perceive that everything is alive in my universe and everything responds to love, you really start to realize that even if you wanted to be alone, you never could be alone. It's not a part of this process. So, it's such a lovely, and it's such a beautiful thing to reflect on and to come back to, because especially in the time period we feel like, even with the explosion of social media, I think it's very easy for us to feel alone. And I think that one of the great things that come from spiritual and spiritual maturity, I love who brought up the idea of spiritual maturity. One of the fruits of that is that idea in that realization that we are never alone, and that there's always, we're working within consciousness. And if we're going to evolve, it's going to be through that mode, which will be the evolution of consciousness. So I think networks is it's going to be the kind of the buzzword of this entire astrological age, which is over 2,000 years. So I think we're just kind of developing that, but it's happening. I mean, that's what brought us together today, and that's what's going to bring future conversations together in the future, and really harvesting that and giving in and kind of taking that leap of faith that, we can do this as one. We are one, so we can do this as one. So we need to have trust in each other. And we need to have trust that, we're each other's teachers and we're each other's students at the same time. And that's really what I'm seeing blossoming within the communities, there's so many great podcasts right now. There's so many individuals on YouTube that are making, that are putting out fantastic material. And I really think the moving towards a center, and if we can really start networking and unifying, just kind of like we've seen in the business world, in the social world, everybody else is networking. And I really feel like our call as spiritual students is to create those networks and really create a stronger community within us. And so I love that idea, because we are so dependent on each other to really help push this alchemical process that, the collective consciousness kind of finds itself in, and kind of the zeitgeist, the moment we find ourselves in.
Eduardo, you had mentioned something about this idea of our problems being unique and kind of being stuck in this concept of my problems are unique, no one can help me with it, and it inevitably kind of creates a distance between us and others. And I've often thought about, I heard one of you mention in a recent podcast that I was listening to, you mentioned this principle of Maya, which in Eastern mysticism is like the energy of illusion. Essentially, it can translate as to that which is not, right? So one of the key tools that Maya utilizes upon the living entity is this idea of discouragement. This is a reflection that I've had, that we become discouraged. Oh, my problems are just my own. No one can help me. No one can really understand. But the importance of, like you said, kind of letting down really it's the ego, it's the lack of humility, and let me experience that, wow, and compassion to suffer with each other, or in other words, to realize that our troubles and our challenges are so much connected, and that actually with each other, and being equipped then with the capacity to transform and overcome and transmutate those challenges and those obstacles, which appear like blocks, but actually are just stepping stones. I had another question here, because Daniel, you were mentioning this idea of networks and connection, and the idea of social media. And so I'm curious about this, the distinction and what your ideas, what you both have, your ideas are on this, the idea of the distinction between the connection that we can sometimes get, and I purposefully air quote, the connection we can sometimes kind of cultivate online or through social media, or the type of connection we think we're getting through social media, versus real connection. And I'm not necessarily divorcing, our ability to actually connect via the internet. But I think that word connection, it's a very nuanced concept, I feel, especially because I have 5,000 friends on Facebook. You have so many followers on Instagram, but like, and the difference in connection. So connection is used in kind of multiple arenas, but I'm interested your thoughts on like the nuance between the two, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh no, I think that's a great point to kind of put up, because and that's the such thing about language in general. It's so, when we put terms to something, we kind of limit stuff, and we really, the whole human expression needs to have quadruple the amount of words that we actually can use, right? So, because it is that physical connection that we see is so different than this online connection that can present itself. And I think there's so much great potential to that online connection, because that's like what brought us together this morning.
Yeah.
But it takes, it's almost like that Mayan illusion. You know, you can kind of feel like you have all these friends. You could have, 50,000 friends on Facebook, but you might actually not have any true connection with those individuals. So I really love the idea of, I think we have to be kind of proactive when we're using this online communication to actually make that personal connection. And I think that's going to be really powerful, utilizing that tool correctly, because I think we could definitely create the ultimate Maya of illusion through the internet. But I also think we have the ability to, take this whole spiritual journey and accelerate it through that mode as well. So yeah, it's we always talk about tools and how it's the tool's not good or bad. It's how you utilize the tool, which is going to produce that end of good or bad. So I do think we have an ability to use social media as kind of an illusion or almost as a distraction, but it also could be even like how they kind of say that in the age of Aquarius, the prophet we're waiting for is actually the prophet that's already been here. And they say it's the net Messiah, because it's the connection of all of us. And it's that digital ability to kind of connect all of us. So when that's kind of our relation, that's kind of my personal relationship with technology at this point. I think it's so important. I think it's great that it gets us connected, but I think we need to take it a step to make it human. I think it's very easy to kind of stay, distant and isolated, and kind of have that almost like that mentality that you see with like influencers at this point, who just take photos of themselves being happy and they paint this beautiful life. And then when you go back to scenes and you hear the background and their life isn't that so beautiful, it's like almost a way to kind of really fabricate the illusion. So I think that's going to be an interesting process. And I think we're, as individuals that are kind of just approaching it, we're kind of pioneers, and we're kind of setting the scene of that and setting, the standard of what that spiritual connection could be online. So I don't know if you, Eddie, I'm sure you have some great insight on that as well.
No, I think it's everything you said is, right on point. And I think it's a good conversation to have. But I think like everything else in this physical realm that we find ourselves in, you're going to have to sift through what is real and what is not real, even though they're both being funneled through one, which is connection, right? So the word connection being that, I can connect with you and you can connect with me via social media platforms. But what's the deeper connection there that really allows us to once again break those barriers down and see one another without the physical face, but what lies behind that? And I think for me, at least, with say with the podcast even, I tend to always lean on my vulnerabilities or tell a personal story. So whoever is out there, and this is how I am with people, period. And this is something that my favorite way to connect with people is in a situation neither of us could have predicted or get out of, because it's a very uncomfortable situation that we find ourselves in. So this could be at an airport and we're both running out of time, or we're both chasing the same flight. There's this immediate connection that you make that you can feel inside, where you might be running and then this guy you just met an hour ago is running with you. And then somehow when you guys make it to the end of the gate, there's undeniable,
you're in the foxhole together.
Exactly. And there's just nothing fake about it. And I think when you're online, it's hard to sort of really put that together in a situation, because what affects you may not affect me, and vice versa. So yeah, I think, but what Daniel was saying about, us making the mold right now, I think it's key for us to have. I mean, there's 4 of us individuals here. I'm sure we're all 4 beautiful people. And I think it's amazing that we can have this conversation without even knowing so much about ourselves, but at least we have a trust in something that is higher or, universal to everyone. And here we are making an example of that. So I think we can definitely, make those connections regardless. So
I really appreciate all of these points, and I'm so impressed by how like articulate you both are. It's really Well, that was one word actually you mentioned, inspiration, the importance of inspiration. I was just reading that word inspiration. It comes from inspiro, which is a Latin word, which literally means to be filled with the breath of God. And just on that thought, like talking about networks, to maybe going from like the social network to the earthly network, and how I think some of the largest organisms on Earth are like mushroom colonies, right? We see so many individual spores, so many mushrooms throughout a forest, but underneath the ground there is this huge network connecting them all. So there is a power within each individual mushroom, for sustenance and for whatever experience you might get from it. But underneath there is this incredible connection, this incredible network. So I think this is also a good point. We seem to be talking about, very rightly so, going behind the veil, looking underneath the iceberg, looking beneath the ground and seeing these connections. So I was just I really wanted to get you guys to discuss a little bit about alchemy, because the community that myself and Ananda are in, like alchemy is something that is quite new to me. Gala's been sharing some books and some teachings, and I've really appreciated everything I've read. But I think for the community that Ananda and myself are in, it's something that is a novelty. It's rare to come across such teachings. But there's so many similarities between something like alchemy and the ancient wisdom traditions of India, and the lifestyle aspect as well. And constantly reminding yourself to look behind the veil of persona, of society, of internet, or whatever it is, and see a more subtle connection, which is actually one that is perceived through consciousness and not through the physical, the biological, as we're often told. So I really, if it's possible, I don't know if it's possible, but I was wondering if you could maybe give us like an introduction to alchemy, the process, the steps, and how that might manifest on like a practical, on a daily basis for us, and maybe the importance of it in these times we're going through. And can the process of alchemy help us establish connection with ourselves, with one another? These kind of things. So if it's possible, to maybe just to like plant some more seeds in our hearts and in the hearts of the viewers, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's with alchemy, what we're kind of approaching with the subject of alchemy is it's this universal principle. So really it's the science of transmutation and kind of the science of evolution. So
could you define that term, transmutation? Because it's probably new for a lot of people.
Right. So transmutation is really going to be looking at, the best way I kind of have been explained is it's the idea of taking a element, and through the process of adding pressure, through the process of kind of reflection, and kind of creating the elements that would usually come around physically for evolution, and taking that element and finding almost the gold within it. So finding that essence that we were talking about, kind of pulling out of it. And, we even see this in physical science today with the study of carbon. It's so funny that modern science always kind of laughs at alchemy because there's like, oh, it's such an old science. But it's so funny because all these new scientific discoveries that we're making were already known to the alchemists of the old. And the beautiful thing about alchemy, to kind of come from that transmutation, is this is a science that, was from Egypt. It was, Indian mystics were practicing it. Chinese mystics were practicing it. Native Americans were practicing it. So we see it in all cultures, and it's really part of this perennial philosophy. But this idea of transmutation is really just the evolution of an element from its lead, which is kind of its heaviest, most physical aspect, and taking it through the process to find the gold within everything. And that gold is that essence, it's that universal consciousness. It's that true connection that we've been talking about this whole time. So the beautiful thing in alchemy is it breaks it down into a very almost like it's just a science of the elements, but you're able to see the 7-step process, which alchemy really breaks down in. And not only can you now start seeing kind of where your society and your culture is in its process and evolution, but you could also see where you are, and you can kind of check in with yourself. But the most beautiful process about this, the most beautiful part of this process is because you've studied the science of transmutation and kind of the science of evolution, you're then able to start that process for yourself rather than it naturally happening, rather than maybe, I approach spirituality through a tragic event in my life. And that's what kind of opened my eyes up to, life beyond the 5 senses. And it took a traumatic event. And the beautiful thing about alchemy is you don't have to wait for that traumatic event. You can actually kickstart it through this process, and you can actually kickstart this evolution. And it's just like taking a piece of coal and adding pressure to make it a diamond. You almost start doing that self-imposed. So again, it's in all spiritual practices, and everybody kind of uses their own language to define it. And all alchemy is doing is it's going to give you a universal language. So if you're looking into yogic studies, if you're looking into Freemasonry in the West, all these principles are going to appear, and you're going to be able to kind of recognize them. So I really think of it as like a universal key that helps you unlock all the spiritual mystery traditions. But again, it's you're not adding thing in. You're taking what you have and you're purifying it, and you're finding that true essence within, so you can create inspiration. Because that God spirit, that breath of God is within us. We just block it. We let this lower ego hide it away. We create these blockages. We have this emotional trauma that really what happens is that universal life force just can't flow through us. So, alchemy is so much and me and Eduardo always have this conversation. It's a lot what you do, but it's also what you don't do in the process of alchemy. You take away the self-defeating philosophy you have on yourself. You take away the negative outlook. You take away the comparing yourself to another individual, and you really start to find that God essence within, and you just kind of try to get yourself out of the way. You try to get your human aspect out of the way, so this universal life force can work through you. And that's where we get that inspiration. And I love how when you guys started this podcast and you kind of set up the mission statement, and you talked about creativity, and how creativity is how we almost recognize the creator and how we partake in the creator. And that's what you're doing. You're really letting this true imagination come out, so you can actually, become what you're supposed to become. Because the problem with what we see with alchemy is we're not caterpillars, we're butterflies. We have this beautiful life we can give. We have this higher perspective. We're not stuck to the ground. We're not stuck to this 5 sense reality. And the process of alchemy gives you not only the confidence, but the guidelines, I guess, and what to look for in that process of becoming a butterfly. And it's all of our process, and it's what we want to do. And it's why it's so important to be around individuals like yourselves, because we are all, in support of each other in our cocoon. And, and we support each other through even just, eye contact, being there for support, sharing ideas. But it's really, I think the greatest and easiest way to approach alchemy is really just looking at that. And it goes great with Earth Day, but that transmutation from the caterpillar to the butterfly, which, the universe is always trying to let us know. It's always yelling, awake, and it's us that just put the blinders up. And it's just like, oh, it's me against the world.
I am vibing with everything you're saying so much right now. Like I feel butterflies in my stomach for sure. And I just wanted to butt in, like you were talking about the evolution of the soul and how, like the process of alchemy is something that can help you to stop comparing yourself to others, right? And I find this so interesting. Some people, it seems, are born butterflies, right? Some people, they have gone through this. They've been held in some crucible. They've gone through some trauma. They've gone through some evolution, and we can compare ourselves to other people in that way. We won't get an accurate kind of reading of where they are spiritually because we're focused on the external. So I love all of those points you're making. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of pick up on that point about inspiration and how, the ego is really something that, whether it's creativity, whether it's spirituality, whether it's compassion, divinity, these are things that are coming through us, not from us. Everything,
Wow. Yeah.
Everything divine, anything of like real substance and value, it never comes from us. It always comes through us. And the ego seems to be that thing that it suffocates you, or it suffocates this inspiration, this breath of God that we don't allow to come through us. So those points really resonated with me. So I just wanted to let you know.
I love it.
I love
yeah,
what you just said, though, how it comes through us. That's a very vital point. I think that's something that we should always, have a deep understanding of, from a younger age, because we're taught that it's from us, as you said. Like, for instance, I play guitar. I've been playing guitar for most of my life, but the best time I play guitar is when I'm letting it come through me, not when I'm playing for someone. So I'm not a performer, maybe for my fiance, but it's almost like I'm giving you a glimpse of what my emotional diary is made out of with an instrument. And the ego at a younger age was a lot of my friends going like, play this one song and do this one thing. And I'm like, it's just not going to work because it's not from the same essence. You know what I mean? So I think I love that you bring up that distinction between the two, what's actually happening versus what we're taught that person has that I don't. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
It reminds me of a flute, whereas the flute is literally, the flute player is breathing into the flute, and from that breath, all of the beautiful music is coming. So in a similar way, this idea of inspiration, literally the breath of God. Let me just be in tune.
Right.
Let me just be in tune so that I can, properly transmit the breath of God through me. And I want to mention too, people are really loving this conversation. It's nice. I think partly because the different time that we're doing this, but also I think partly just the nature of the conversation. But I'm seeing a lot of new faces and people that I know and love, but new faces of engagement in the comment section here. And friends of ours are saying that sounds like this principle in Bhakti Yoga, this principle of tapa. Tapa means austerity, or another way it's defined as kind of like this fire, like the fire of refinement. And you mentioned that, the alchemic process of kind of getting gold even from basic carbon, right? Refining kind of that, the denser elements of the ego, the denser elements of the material, refining it down and into its purest gold. It reminded me of there's a favorite author of Keli and I, and you may have heard of him also, Richard Rohr. Have you guys read anything by Richard Rohr?
I have not.
I have not.
Highly recommended.
Right.
The book I recommend to everyone is Falling Upward. Really wonderful book. I just recently read a book of his called Everything Belongs, and I wanted to share this one section. It was a quote. He says, "Native religions speak of winter and summer. Mystical authors speak of darkness and light. Eastern religions speak of yin and yang, or the Tao. Seasons transform the year. Light and darkness transform the day. Christians call it the Paschal Mystery, but we are all pointing to the necessity, of both descent and ascent. The Paschal Mystery is the pattern of transformation. We are transformed through death and rising, probably many times. There seems to be no other cauldron of growth and transformation." And this is the point that really was sticking out. "We seldom go freely into the belly of the beast, unless we face a major disaster like the death of a friend or spouse or loss of a marriage or job, we usually do not go there. As a culture, we have to be taught the language of dissent, the great language of it's the great language of religion. It teaches us to enter willingly, trustingly into the dark periods of life. So I was just thinking, because Daniel, you brought up this beautiful point about the material world, the material energy, prakriti, as it said in Sanskrit, will automatically churn and change and transform us and refine us, right? But the process of intentionally going into the belly of the beast, intentionally going into the dark, intentionally, trustingly, graciously going into the darkness of that cauldron of our purification. And it doesn't mean misery. It means actually great freedom, but there's a lot of fear. And you guys are both familiar with the hero's journey, so it's like, entering past those thresholds into the darkness, into this space of, I don't know if I'm going to return, even though we know that we will. Right? I thought of it. I thought how scary sometimes like self-work is, like in recent conversations and just in my own process of, man, when I look at my heart and all the like anxiety or anger or fear or attachment that I've, and kind of like self-consciousness, the self-doubts that you were both mentioning, when I look at all of that that's in there, sometimes I can become discouraged. I can become nervous, like, wow, that's going to take a long time. It's going to be really hard. It's really scary. But I don't know. I've thought how like, I'm going to come back from that. I just have to decide to go in. It's not like my brain's not just going to like turn off and like stop working and I'm going to cease to exist because I went and dealt with my, the garbage in my heart. It's like, I'm going to come back from that. But the fear of like willingly going into the belly of the beast.
Yeah. Or being very well said. And what I wanted to add to that, because that's incredible. And like, I like that you said the great freedom that comes from it. It does, it does give you this chance to realize that while you're in the belly of the beast, you will come out. But while we're in the belly of the beast, you hope it's just like a 1-day period.
Yeah.
You're like,
maybe
okay,
like 10 minutes. I'll just go in 10 minutes and come out.
Yeah. And to add to Daniel's, explanation on alchemy, the 7 stages do a really good job at sort of probing you, or at least pushing you to continue on and staying longer in the belly of the beast in order to come out more refined. But what people need to know is, that is the process. While you're in the belly of the beast, in that one moment, you are already doing it. So you can find yourself in the situation you're meant to be in, that is an extreme situation or something tough, but also think like, this is it, right? Like after this, there is no more. And alchemy teaches you, and I'm sure exactly what you're saying with this book, with Falling Upward, it seems like there's the same idea of, the process is going to take you through many transformations throughout your life, but fear not, because there will be something that will refine you in a way that nothing else might do the job, other than you being in this very intense moment right now. And I think that we all avoid that, and it's okay. We avoid pain, we avoid suffering because, we know how it makes us feel. But we don't recognize that sometimes it's the necessary step for you to evolve into something more meaningful and more beautiful. So I got to check out this author though.
Yeah, totally. I was just thinking, I was looking at my cord. It's like a upwards, or like a spiral, an upward moving spiral. It looks like I'm falling. I'm I don't know if you can see this actually.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just like holding a weird thing.
No.
Right? As you go up in the spiral, it looks like you're going up sometimes, and then it looks like you're falling down, you're descending, it's getting worse, and then you're going up,
awesome.
But ultimately you're always kind of moving up. I just was thinking of that as I held
No,
it.
that's great. That's a
I
great
love that analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I want to pick up on that as well, because it's like spiritual life is not linear. We are told that success in life is this, and then you achieve that, and then you achieve this, and that's the story we're sold. That's the paradigm we're sold. We get this education, we get this job, and then we progress on to this and this and this. That's success. But spiritual life, it's almost opposite. It's kind of you have to have this feeling of defeat, of pressure, of of difficulty and discomfort in order to actually attain something higher. So does that link in with the alchemical process? Is there perhaps a feeling that comes up when one commences a process like alchemy, where you feel actually, although you are making spiritual advancement, you feel like you're not? Is there that kind of contradistinction? Is there that kind of paradox that you can experience? And what does that look like? And how would one know? Because it might be very confusing to feel like you're not progressing, but actually you are. I don't know. Is that something that exists?
Yeah, and that's such a great point, because we're talking about this spiritual progress, and we're talking about this evolution, and like how you guys, I love the analogy, because you don't always know when you're making progress, and sometimes you feel like you're really in the dark. And I would say that's one of the strong suits of alchemy, because it's broken up into steps, and you're able to kind of recognize your step, even though you're not in the next level that you want to be. You can kind of see where you're going to, so you can kind of relate with the situation. So within the process of alchemy, you have that dark night of the soul, and you go through that process, and you have that feeling that, maybe even spiritual develop's not for me. Like, you believe in everything, and this is so funny, because it's happened to myself. Completely know about universal intelligence, know about the evolution of consciousness, but getting into the spot of the dark night of the soul and being like, I completely believe in spiritual evolution, but maybe it's just not for me. And that's the most ridiculous. It throws away everything that I just said, because it's like, no, if you're part of consciousness, you can evolve consciously, right? So one of the things I love about alchemy is it helps you, guide you to what steps are coming next. So what we kind of see is most people stay in the first two steps of alchemy because they're not aware of how to make that progress go. So the first two steps are calcination and dissolution. And it's really kind of taking that left brain hemisphere is what you're kind of purifying through the fire in the first step. And then the right hemisphere, which is more of your holistic emotional aspects. And most of us just ping pong between the first and second step our entire lives, because we're not aware that, I need to actually take this to, you kind of deal with the fire and the water, and the next step is air, rising with the spirit. But we get so caught up in the fires of life and drowning in the waters of emotion that we never actually start breathing in that inspiration to rise up out of our situation and get that higher perspective and kind of continue the process. So that's and again, this isn't all mystery traditions. We see this, but it's very vivid in alchemy. Alchemy is all about, it's that great quote, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Keep going. Don't stop.
Don't stop. Don't stop at hell. There's nothing for you here, right? And I think that just goes with what you guys were kind of alluding to with this leap of faith that comes with spirituality, because there is this leap of faith that you're like, am I actually going to progress through this? Am I going to survive this? Because it's the scariest thing in the world. You brought up a great point. It's so scary, but it's the scariest thing in the world because it's the most important thing in the world. Yeah. Because, even one of the things that we really study with alchemy, and I think this is so important, and it's important for us to all kind of look at, if you only know yourself 50%, you can only give yourself 50% to others. So it's actually the most selfish thing in the world not to go on the spiritual journey and know who you are completely, because then you can't give yourself completely to your community. And
that's the network again. Yeah. That's
the network.
Working on yourself, you're actually benefiting the whole,
Right. Because as you take a step up, it allows me to get higher. And you speak about this bhakti yoga with the idea of service and how important service is. and you want to give yourself 100% in service. But if you only know a limited version of yourself, and you know 30% of yourself, well, you can only give 30% to your loved ones. You can only give 30% to your community. So we go through this process in doing self-work. And when, sometimes I tell individuals that, oh no, self-work is the most important thing you could ever do. And they kind of have this knee-jerk reaction to think like, oh, that's selfish. And you're like, no, like, you need to know who you are so you could give the gift of who you are to others and share it with all the ones you love.
Wow.
And it's so important. So I just love that. I love that we're having this conversation because, one, it gives strength to put this into words. And it's so important because we all can get stuck on that mountain up to spiritual evolution. It's very easy to set up a tent and say, no, you know what? I've done enough. I'm comfortable here. And this is how high I'm going to go. But that's not why we're here. We always have to keep ascending, and we always have to get a higher perspective.
In Bhakti, there's this concept called Anarta Nivritti. And it's very much what you're describing. Anarta. So Narta means a desirable thing. Those wonderful qualities, those just the desirable things in the world, like strength, courage, compassion, love, like deep love, connection, all these things that we're discussing. When you put the A, Anarta, means undesirable things, means those things that obstruct us, those things that are blocking us. And in the description of there's actually a 9-step process of spiritual evolution described in Bhakti. And in that 9-step process, Anarta Nivritti is the longest. It's that process of taking all of those undesirable things out of the way. Kind of all those things come to the surface, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of ghee. Ghee is like this, right? To make ghee, you boil the butter, and then all the like impurities of the butter start bubbling up, and then they all sink to the bottom, and you have that clean, pure, golden ghee, right? So in a similar way, in our process that you're describing, like going up the mountain, the thighs are burning, you're sweating, it's like whatever, it's so difficult and challenging. But if you just stop there, then you're not at the top, you're not at base camp, you're just kind of in this no man's zone. And I think that's, in Christianity, we call it the dark night of the soul, right? That whole Anarta Nivritti stage, that middle stage of the process of the cleansing of our consciousness, as our consciousness is being upgraded, just to emphasize this point again, to keep going, to keep moving forward in that. And also, sorry, the idea of, if I only know myself 50%, then I can only give 50% of myself to others, right? And I think that the importance of individuation really, until, sometimes my identity as a soul, as a living entity is more or less theoretical, right? And a big part of Bhakti is actually understanding that spiritual identity. So that it's not some theoretical thing that I'm a soul, I'm a living entity, but actually understanding that. And to the degree that I'm understanding that, to the degree that I can inspire or transfer that inspiration to others, to the degree that I can speak to that reality in others as well.
That's an amazing point. It makes me think of that quote, like, we rise by lifting others. Someone shared I'm not sure if it's true. I haven't tried it myself. You get a box of frogs and you take the lid off, you'd think all the frogs jump out, but apparently as soon as one frog starts to get out, the other frogs drag them down, and he tries to get out, and then they, and that's that's what like Western society feels like, or even global society, you could say. Sometimes it's like, to make yourself appear bigger, more successful, you actually pull people down. And I was reading, there's a famous musician called Victor Wooten, and he was saying, like, because he's such a good musician, he's so famous, people would put him on a pedestal, right? People would say, wow, you're a great, you've mastered music. And he realized, instead of coming down to their level and trying to benefit them that way, he said, no, stay on that pedestal they put you on and pull them up, And that's, I love that point. Like, we can only meet someone as deeply as we've met ourselves. And it seems like alchemy is It's combining both spirituality and science. It's a process that you go through. So I'm very inspired by everything you're sharing. I'm wondering, how much time do you guys have left? Because I know you have to probably teach class, and I'm not sure what your days are like.
Yeah, I have about 20 minutes left, and then other teachers will start walking in. They'll be like, "What are you doing?" Like they'll be like looking over my shoulder. Yeah, I have about 20 minutes left.
Same.
But I would love to do it to that limit. But again, guys, I feel like I've just met like two new best friends.
Yeah.
So I really hope we can just continue these conversations even beyond this. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it's such a blessing to connect with you guys. I hope we can do another one, another few, hopefully. Maybe as we're coming to the end of the conversation, if we could just bring it back to like Earth,
let's like ground down.
Yeah, let's ground. In the Bhakti tradition, in a lot of the ancient wisdom traditions from India, the philosophies, although mystical and esoteric, there is a personal aspect, right? For instance, you might see a celestial phenomenon or a earthly phenomenon, like a tree, or like Mother Earth. We say Mother Earth, or the stars, the sun, the moon, whatever it is. In these Vedic literatures, there's actually personalities behind these things. We see this as well in Native American teachings. It's like, it's not just a tree, it's not just a mountain, it's not just the moon. There is a deity, there is someone presiding over these phenomena. The earth is literally known as Bhumi Devi. Mother Earth is a personality, I really appreciate in Vedic literature how there is a personal aspect to everything, because I think when there is that personalism, it's easier to build networks, it's easier to maintain networks. If we are just communicating with something of perhaps no consciousness, no substance, no personality, I think it can perhaps lead to like devastating results for relationship, because there isn't that accountability you might feel to behave with another person, another soul, another life form, consciousness. There isn't that accountability to approach that relationship, properly and with gratitude and not exploit. So I think like our approach to and our connection with Mother Earth is actually very impersonal these days. We don't see Mother Earth as a mother, as a person. We see it as a resource to be plundered, to be exploited for our benefit. There isn't that feeling of connection and network and personhood there. Whereas in ancient India, they very much realize Mother Earth is providing for us. There is abundance. There is a personal connection. So I'm just wondering, in the alchemical process and everything else you guys talk about, just to finish off the conversation, where personalism comes in, and maybe this is something we can talk about if we do another podcast. But
we will.
Yeah.
When? More like when?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, maybe just to finish off this conversation, be great if you guys could elaborate on that point a bit.
Did you want to jump in, Eddie, or do you want me to start it off?
Oh, go right ahead. I mean,
okay.
So if I understand the question correctly, those you're saying within the steps of alchemy, how do we make that personal connection with Mother Earth and the environment that surrounds us? Is that correct?
Yeah, and with ourselves, because the process of alchemy is one of self-discovery, self-realization. So we're talking about trying to realize ourselves so we can give our true potential to others and help others realize themselves as well. So who is the person behind the veil? Who is the real you, and how can that be discovered through alchemy or whatever else you might feel inspired to share?
Yeah, well, Daniel, if you want to bring up the materia prima, materia prima is something that sort of speaks to that essence that you're talking about, that's behind the veil. And the 7 stages of alchemy are a goal to get to that golden thread, to understand what lies behind, this physical body. So I don't know if Daniel, you want to elaborate on that, if I'm on the right track there.
Yeah, well, the Emerald Tablet really speaks about, everything comes from this one thing, and we kind of broke that down as carbon, but that personal connection to keep the universe alive. The ancient alchemists definitely they communicated through elementals. So they really used the elements. So, when the alchemists are talking about fire dragons, they're not talking about a mythological figure. They're talking about the personality and the essence that comes from a flame. When they were talking about fairies, they're talking about the essences that come from the air and the butterflies and the gnomes on earth, and how they're the grounded aspect. And they communicated with all these things as they were living things. Even sitting on a rock, they would ask the rock for permission. Even when they were, I love this story about Native American hunters when they would be hunting buffaloes on the plains. Before they release their arrow, they make a prayer for the soul to leave the body of the animal they're about to take. So they're making a prayer to please leave the body so you don't
almost
feel
like
pain.
infusing the arrow with intention.
Exactly, with intention. So, I don't want you to feel pain. Thank you for providing energy for me, for the evolution of my consciousness. And I'm not taking this sacrifice lightly. I'm going to use the energy you gave me to expand the consciousness's evolution. So when you make your way up the chain of ladder of consciousness and you incarnate as a human, hopefully this world's a little better of a place for you. And it's a little bit better of a setup for you. So there was always this deep connection with the elements, deep connection with nature, the food we're taking in. But even, just blessing the water that you're washing your hands in, giving thanks to the ground that's allowing you to reconnect with the earth and keep you grounded and keep you in this world so you can do the work you need to do. It's such a beautiful aspect. And I think it's something that's still very much alive in Eastern mysticism. But I really do feel like Western civilization, and kind of like how you said, really this globalization that's come from this, they've tried to divorce us from this as much as possible. Even our connection with like the factory farming that happens in the West, that's a complete break of the contract that husbandry established. When we Eddie and myself are vegetarians, but we understand that the science of husbandry that goes way back was there was an agreement, like, I'm going to take your life early, but I'm going to make sure you have shelter, and I'm going to make sure you have food and water, and you're going to have a very easy life, but I am going to take your life earlier than you would normally expire. But there was at least an agreement there with the animals where we just took that contract and ripped it up. And now we're just like, even though we divorce it, that this is future consciousness, this is future human consciousness, because we're in a situation where the ends always justify the means. And we're seeing that evolution. We're seeing that disconnection from our earth. We're seeing that disconnection from, fracking for minerals, for computer chips. We're seeing all of these consequences. And, it's just so funny how we look to solve these problems in the West is we just like to apply Band-Aids. We don't like to actually take the bullet out of the wound. And we talk about this all the time, but we love arguing about what color Band-Aid you're going to use. It's like, a red. And then this group's like, no, it's got to be a blue Band-Aid. And everybody's just yelling about what color Band-Aid to use. But we're not actually, solving the problem, which is connecting to consciousness high and low. Because, you find, you climb the ladder to heaven to find God or universal consciousness, but you also go really deep within and it takes you to the same place. And I think that's really important, that reestablishing that connection to nature and seeing that it's this living organism. And, we don't want to be a cancer on this organism. We want to be the blossom of more expansion. And I really think that's going to be part of the networks that we create in these spiritual communities, is to take care of lower forms of consciousness and even higher forms of consciousness, like what our earth is made up of, and what actually, houses our experience for conscious evolution.
Yeah. You mentioned the ends justifying the means, and I was thinking that, but even our ends are very like the ends, because that I thought the ends don't really justify the means. The ends of our society, of modern society, don't really justify the means, because those ends in and of themselves are so short-sighted, right? That you really don't see, you're not looking at the ultimate end of what's going to become of exploiting the earth, of exploiting these animals. It's a very short-sighted ends trying to justify the means.
Wow.
Yeah, well said.
That was so perfect. That was so well said, because you're 100% correct on that.
Eduardo, did you have anything else that you wanted to share too on that?
No, I think, I mean, everything that we're all speaking about, I think we have the right idea. I one thing that resonates, I guess, if I do want to add something, is, as Daniel said, we don't want to be that cancer to, this living and breathing organism that's all around us. And I think all animals already live by that contract that we're talking about, and it's us. And I think it's us on purpose that need to go through a series of stages in order to make that connection once again that we lost, from the moment that we, came into our first breath. And I think that is part of why we study alchemy, is that, or in any other practice for higher, to reach a higher sense of self. I think it's best to know how to get out of the way, but also how to reconnect to something that was already there before us and will remain after. And I think that is probably the reason why, for instance, in our culture here, or in Arizona, you should say, we have all kinds of physical activities that I like talking to people about, and one of them might be backpacking. But at the end of the day, you've gone through these stages of suffering, you've gone through stages of doubt, and you've gone through whether or not you can or cannot get through this pilgrimage out here in the wilderness. But everyone reaches the same conclusion at the end, is once it's over, you made it through, you pushed on, only to just have your eyes gaze upon the stars from the night that you spend in the wilderness to then the sunrise in the morning when you wake up. And so people go through their own little spiritual, and it's not little, but their own spiritual connection, and have a greater understanding on how not to be that cancer that Daniel's talking about. So even if you don't practice any sort of religion or have a philosophy that you're grounded in, it's very easy to subject yourself. At least for us, we've had the privilege out here. There's vast wilderness here. And I meet people who have no spiritual path, but they're some of the most spiritual people I've ever met, because they have a complete acknowledgement of the connection they're making by subjecting themselves to something that someone else might say, did you have to go there? And did you have to spend that much time out there? But they know that there's a purification that comes from it when they return. And so, again, back to the whole idea of this conversation we're all having, is whether it's alchemy or it's the idea of bhakti, is just, I think we're all trying to reach that connection that Daniel already spoke about, with giving the permission, or asking for permission, to sit on a rock as you acknowledge the rock to be just as alive as you are, and getting there, I think, is the goal, So,
Keli, I was wondering if you could share that. Keli, you just recently shared that prayer, that Sanskrit prayer about Mother Earth. And I thought how much it was nice. You were talking about asking a rock before you sit upon it. There's actually a Sanskrit prayer that is very similar to Earth.
Well, maybe maybe I can do this. We can finish off with this prayer.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I'm blown away by both of you, and so grateful for the time that you've given us today. So grateful. I really hope we can do this again, whether it's broadcast or not. Talking about spiritual maturity, I can see that you're both very advanced personalities. I'm learning a lot, just from speaking, and definitely from listening to your podcasts. And just this point of us working on ourselves, really we're just having a conversation we want to have, and through that other people can benefit as well. So I really hope we can do this again sometime. And there's so many things. I mean, I made a list here of all different topics.
That's excellent.
With all those seeds.
Consciousness, evolution of the soul, the Kabbalion alchemy, Dharma, the hero's journey, Jacob's ladder, on and on and on.
All of them.
Excellent.
be great to dive into this. But yeah, this is a book called The 8 Elements, actually, and this is a really wonderful book by Rancho Prime, and he wrote this book in the north of England in the Lake District, and it's a really interesting book because he is going through all of the 8 elements that we kind of conceive of. So he's talking about earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, wisdom, ego, and then spirit. And his experience with all of these elements through his life. And in the chapter of Earth, he gives this prayer that maybe we can finish on. So the Sanskrit is Prithvi Tvaya Drita Loka Devi Tvam Vishnuna Drita Tvam Cha Dharaya Mam Nityam Pavitram Chasanam Kuru. And the translation is, Mother Earth, you support all beings. Goddess, you are maintained by Vishnu. Please always maintain me and bless this place. And I just think that's such a lovely prayer because the essence of the prayer is gratitude, really. You know? And I think like that is how networks are made, and that's how they're maintained, it seems, you know, is through a shared experience of gratitude. And instead of ego-centric life, instead of having yourself in the center, like an eco-centric life where you see yourself as part of a larger organism. That's kind
beautiful.
of the message.
Yeah, it was a beautiful reading as well, and what a great way to kind of close up this conversation. I couldn't think of a better way to kind of formulate it, and you know, that idea of gratitude and bringing that with us and instilling that in our days is such a fantastic thing. So
for real,
you know, and I guess on speaking on that gratitude, and this is something we always kind of end all of our conversations with a lot as well. But you know, meeting you two today and having this connection and being on there with you, Eduardo, it's always good to see you early morning. But
you too, man.
You know, and all the listeners and all your guys' fantastic listeners and the people part of your community, it is just such an honor to be on this journey with all of you guys, and it's so empowering. And I just really, you know, when we're kind of going through these spiritual understanding and this gratitude, we also need to have gratitude, you know, for ourselves. And it's so easy to beat ourselves up that we're not making the progress we need to make. But I think the universe is very proud of each and every one of us for the steps that we've made and the, you know, the self direction that we've kind of put ourselves onto this progress. So, you know, it was just, I love the prayer, and I just the vibration that comes from Sanskrit is just such you just feel it so deep inside you. And it just penetrates, right? Right. It's just amazing.
Like the arrow. It's like the arrow, huh?
It's like the arrow. It's like the arrow. You know, it just, right when you started reading, it just like my eyes immediately closed, and I just felt like I went to such a place, and it just, you just feel it kind of come within you and become a part of you. So that was such a beautiful way to kind of end this conversation.
Yeah, we thank you. Thank you very much, because I mean, everything we spoke about and everything we can continue speaking about in terms of philosophy and an understanding that we each have of this, you know, realm that we find ourselves in, this is the evidence of it all lying in truth, because this connection that I feel will carry out through the rest of my day. And even if you aren't with me to witness it, I can tell you, whoever I see for the rest of the day goes, you know, there's something extra in your skip, and that skip is because I had this experience with you guys. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's the breath of God. I think that's what we'll take with us, that inspiration.
Exactly.
I'm just gonna echo all of that gratitude, because it's it's the level of kindred spirits that I'm experiencing right now is quite off the charts. And so I again just want to appreciate our conversation and appreciate the taking time at, you know, arranging over 3 time zones is not an easy thing, and I'm grateful that we had the capacity to do it, and looking forward to more conversations in the future.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much, Ananda and Keli. Yes,
absolutely. And we'd love to have you guys on the Know Thyself podcast to really focus on the Bhakti, because we really do have a pull for more Eastern philosophy. And Eduardo and I are definitely a little bit, our background is definitely Western mysticism, and we approach Eastern mysticism with so much curiosity and so much love and gratitude. but to have individuals that have, went through that process of living in an ashram, and it would just be, they would just love it. They would just be begging for you guys to come back all the time. So we can't wait to make that happen as well.
Cool.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that invitation. I love that.
Oh, absolutely.
Is there something we should mention, Ananda, before we go? Like, we have the email and stuff. People
Yeah.
can get-
So I just, if you want to connect with Keli and I, if you have any questions or reflections, or even requests on things that you'd really like to hear, you can either email us at heytakenote@gmail.com. You can find us also through Bodica, as well as on our Instagram, the takenote.podcast. Keli, is that what it is?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Takenote.podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear any reflections, anything that really struck you from these conversations that we're having. But until then, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for all your engagement in the comments. There's just a lot of different comments coming in, people feeling so inspired by the conversation, so inspired by the points that were being brought up, so inspired by the connections that were being made.
I just want to say as well, thank you to Gala for
Right.
for the connection as well, and thank you to Bodica. Thank you for this platform, giving us this space to connect and have these conversations. And let's do this again as soon as possible, as soon as time allows. I can't wait.
Yeah, big thanks to God for getting this all connection. I'm so excited to see all the projects that she's working on with her directing abilities. And, that's actually how I got connected. I was just nerding out. I found one of her pictures, like her video clips on Instagram, and I was just nerding out about it. And I just posted it on the Know Thyself site, because I'm like, this is beautiful videography. And she just messaged me and was like, oh, I listened to your podcast. And I almost threw up. I was so excited. I was like, I was just hyperventilating. I'm like, you listen to my podcast? Like, this is the most amazing thing in the world. So we're so blessed to have that connection, because it brought us here today. So that excitement wasn't not justified, because it's brought me so many great connections. So yeah. So blessed.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Great. Let's do this again as soon as possible. Have a lovely day,
Sounds
both of
good,
you.
Gentlemen.
Do the same. Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Bye.